Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Blake.
This morning we're going to hear from Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Repeat after me. I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
Lovely, thank you. Make yourself
Thank you very much. Can you give your full name, please?
John James Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. You have provided 3 witness statements in this inquiry. The first was produced for phases 5 and 6 and related to whistleblowing. Could I just ask you, please, to turn to that first?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that statement dated the 25th of April 2024?
It is.
And could I ask you, please, to turn to the final substantive page? That is page 19.
Yes.
Can you confirm that that is your signature?
It is.
And can you confirm that that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
There's a couple of amendments, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So on page 62, paragraph 88,
Yes.
the final sentence, which says 5th of October 2005. Could we change that, please, to the 5th of October 2004?
Absolutely.
Page 67,
Yes.
footnotes 132 and 133, amend to the 26th of July 2019, from 26th of July 2019 to the 29th of July 2019.
Thank you.
Thank you. Page 77, paragraph 92. The first and then into the second line, amend March 2015 to May 2015. And then the last one on that statement, page 130, is it index entry 125. Amend 26th of July 2019 to the 29th of July 2019.
Thank you very much. And subject to those changes, is that statement true to the best of your knowledge?
It is.
Thank you. That has a unique reference number, WITN 1119010, and will be uploaded onto the inquiry's website. The second statement was produced for this phase. Could I ask you please to turn to that? And is that dated the 22nd of August of this year?
It is.
Could I please ask you to turn to the final substantive page?
Yes.
I think that is page 99.
Yes.
And can you confirm that that is your signature?
It is.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Another amendment, if that's okay, please.
Absolutely.
Page 57 of that statement.
Yes.
The last sentence in the second to last paragraph of 76A, it should say that A&CI perform an independent sample check of cases. So that's changing my to A&CI.
Thank you. And is that the only change to that statement?
Sorry, I haven't located that yet. Can you tell me the reference again?
I think it's page 57.
Yeah.
Just the final sentence before the final paragraph.
Yeah.
The policy provides that. Is that correct?
It does.
Yeah. And what was the substantive amendment?
So, sir, that was to remove the word my and replace it with A&CI.
I think actually that change has been made in the version that I have.
Okay, thank you.
So the policy provides that A&CI perform, yeah?
Yes, sir.
Fine, but my version had that as well, so that's fine.
Thank you. And is that the only change or not changed to that particular?
That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much. And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief? Subject
It is.
to that change? Thank you. That has a URN of WITN 111902000. and will also be uploaded onto the inquiry's website. Third and final statement is dated the 9th of September of this year, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And that addresses the issue of Project May. That's the race identity codes issue.
Yes.
Could I please ask you to turn to page 9?
Yes.
Is that your signature?
It is.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
No changes to that one?
No changes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bartlett, you are currently the Director of the Assurance and Complex Investigations team, is that correct?
It is.
That was formerly known as the Central Investigations Unit,
That's correct.
and you were appointed to that role on the 21st of February 2022.
To the head of role, yes.
Thank you. And when did you first join the post office?
On that date.
Thank you. The Central Investigations Unit became what we know as A&CI in August of 2023, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, taking them separately, what is assurance in Assurance and Complex Investigations team?
So assurance is investigative assurance. So part of my team's role is to work with particularly the retail teams, and they review on a regular basis. Every 2 months, they dip sample cases that are worked on in the retail space, and they look at it from an investigative practice basis, dip sample, and then make any recommendations for improvements.
And you've mentioned the retail team. Lots of teams are known by different names. What do you mean by retail team?
Predominantly the teams that work under Mel Park.
Thank you. And CI, Complex Investigations, what does that involve?
Okay, so that involves cases that we're asked to investigate in respect to principally sort of allegations made against senior members of staff, particularly those at SEG, so the Strategic Executive Group, or at the board. It involves looking into what we call fact finds of where there may be enterprise-wide or otherwise significant process failings in the organisation. So we look at root cause. It also covers the Project Phoenix or past investigations work. That falls under that too. And within that are, separate to Project Phoenix, but within the complex or sensitive side, are any investigations that come out of Speak Up reports.
Thank you very much. Your background is as a former police officer, is that correct?
17 years ago, yes.
Thank you. Can you assist us with what rank you achieved in the police?
Detective Constable.
And following that, I think you've worked at various private sector organisations and also the pensions regulator, is that correct?
So I have worked in 2 financial regulators and 2 corporates before coming to Post Office.
And largely those roles involved investigations?
Yes.
Thank you. I think you also have some legal training, is that correct?
I have a legal qualification rather than training. I have the graduate diploma in law.
Thank you. How were you recruited to the post office?
I was approached by an agency.
Thank you. And where were you at that point in time?
I was head of enforcement investigations at the pension regulator.
Thank you. I'd like to begin today by just asking you about your induction at the post office. Did you receive any briefings when you first joined on matters relating to the inquiry, such as wrongful prosecutions, Horizon issues, group litigation?
Yes, I did.
Who provided you with that induction?
My boss, so the group legal director.
And who was that at the time?
Sarah Gray.
Thank you. And that's still Sarah Gray?
It is. I also, sorry, just to complete that, also did a 1-day induction, which every new joiner goes through. And they covered those issues as well there.
And since then, have you been following developments in the inquiry?
Yes.
Have you read, for example, the expert reports produced by Duncan Atkinson, KC, or listened to his evidence?
I listened to some of his evidence.
And in light of what you've heard from the inquiry subsequently, what are your reflections on the training that you were provided or the induction that you were provided at the beginning?
I think it has been reinforced by the compulsory training that everybody in Post Office has to do in relation to understanding the timeline and the effects of the scandal and the role that Post Office played in that. That has certainly assisted. That, I think, was about a year ago.
Thank you. Are you in any way involved in that?
No.
I would like to talk to you about various other teams at the Post Office that touch upon matters relating to investigations. The first is what was called the security team, and that's a team that we've heard quite a lot about in this inquiry. At paragraph 11 of your witness statement, your second witness statement, you say that that team stopped being responsible for investigations in 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, although I think in effect they'd stopped before then, but they had it removed from them as part of their role, as I understand it then.
And you've said that they've been renamed the Network Crime and Risk Support Team. Is that correct?
It is.
And you say in your statement that they support postmasters to prevent retail crime in their new role. Can you assist us with what you mean by that?
So I have drawn that from material produced by that team's director, and my understanding from that material and from conversations with them is that it's a crime prevention or an incident response function. But more than that, I couldn't really say because we don't really interact with them over those issues.
Could we please turn to poll 00447-931? This is a document that you have exhibited. It says service and support, overview of teams and responsibilities. Our vision is to champion our postmasters through easy, reliable and trusted service to give postmasters confidence that we will deliver the best possible outcome. Do you know when this was produced or the approximate time? The metadata, if it assists, suggests May 2021. Is this a document that you are, first of all, familiar with, and second of all, was it around when you joined the business?
I don't know. The name change, I think, I'm not sure if the name change is connected to this document, but the name change that I'm aware of is much more current than that date.
Thank you. Because if we turn to page 12 of this document, it sets out a who's who in the security team. And we see there a number of names that are well familiar to the inquiry. We have, for example, security analyst Chris Knight. We know that he was at the Post Office from 1983, was involved in the cases of Peter Holmes, Alison Henderson, Alison Hall as examples. We have on the right-hand side Mr. Talbot, who was a Phase 4 witness in the inquiry. He had been at the Post Office since 1987. We have a little further down there, Robert Daly, by way of example, again, long-standing at the Post Office since 1979. He was involved in a number of cases, the cases of Quam, Peter Holmes' case, amongst others. We have Steve Bradshaw, another name that's well known to the inquiry. He had been at the Post Office since 1978 and was involved in a large number of investigations that have been looked at by this inquiry. Janet Skinner, Huey Thomas, the case of Ishak, Lisa Brennan, Lynette Hutchings, Joan Bailey, the Sefton and Neild case, McKnight case, amongst others. Are these individuals, or some of them, still involved in that network crime and risk support team?
Yes.
Does that team involve interacting with sub-postmasters?
I believe so.
Can you see a problem with that?
Yes.
If we could turn to your second statement, please. That's WITN 1190200. Can you expand on you said you can see a problem with that. What is the problem as far as you are concerned?
I think the work for the inquiry, and from what I know from Project Phoenix, would strongly suggest that it's not appropriate for those individuals to be interacting with postmasters given the behaviour of the past.
Could we turn please to page 6 of your statement? It's paragraph 13. You say that I've been asked to provide detail about where the former security team investigators sit within the new structure. The inquiry has linked that request with recent media reports which suggest those former investigators all continue to be employed by Post Office to conduct investigations. It is right that some individuals who previously worked in the security team within Post Office remain in the business whilst others have left. However, none of those remaining are members of the A&CI team, which now has conduct of all criminal investigations within the Post Office. So that's true as far as it goes, that they're not involved in your particular team and are not involved directly in those criminal investigations that are carried out by the Post Office. But do we have to add to that a number of them are still involved in the business in sub-postmaster facing roles?
Yes, but not in investigatory roles, as I understand it.
What do you think supporting postmasters to prevent retail crime involves?
From what I've been told, that's around placement of CCTV, cameras, panic alarms. I think they also do review of things like safe codes and things like that. So it's physical security.
And do you know of any plans or considerations that might be taking place to either remove those individuals from the business or to put them in roles where they don't interact with sub-postmasters?
I believe that's being discussed, yes.
And what is your view as to what should happen?
The least should be that they're not in postmaster-facing roles.
And can you tell us why you think it is that it's taken so many years to reach a decision on that?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm afraid. I joined 2 years ago. I don't know why that this wasn't considered before that. I know it's been discussed during my time here, but I've not been party to those discussions or any rationale as to why they are there.
Thank you. That can come down, please. Moving on to another team, criminal law team. Now, you've said in your statement that that was effectively Jarnail Singh between 2012 and 2015. Is that correct?
As I understand it, yes.
There is now a criminal lawyer at the Post Office called Stuart Lill. Is that right?
Yes, in the remediation unit.
So he sits in the remediation unit addressing matters such as compensation and redress.
I think it's more around appeals, actually.
And appeals. Thank you very much. Does he provide any advice to your team in respect of criminal investigations?
Yes, he does.
Does he provide any training to your team in respect of criminal investigations?
He provides feedback on a case-by-case basis, and he has attended some of our team, or at least one that I can remember, team training sessions where we discussed disclosure and things like that.
Thank you. Do you know his background at all?
I believe he was a prosecutor for either for CPS or for HMRC.
Thank you. Do you know when he joined the Post Office?
It was before me, but I don't know the precise date.
Thank you. In terms of a criminal law team at the Post Office, is the closest we come to that something within your team that's called the Law Enforcement Engagement Team?
I wouldn't describe it as a legal team, no.
Sorry, a criminal team. So a team that has the direct link to, for example, law enforcement agencies.
Yes, so there are 3.5 people whose role it is to engage with law enforcement on behalf of Post Office.
And am I right to say that all criminal investigations will go through that team?
Yes.
And who heads that particular sub-team?
One of the senior investigation managers in my team,
And what's their name?
Andrew Morley.
Thank you. In terms of other teams, you've explained in your witness statement there's also a financial crime team that deals with things like anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism, and anti-bribery and corruption. Am I right to say that they wouldn't be involved in matters such as investigating individual shortfalls in post offices?
So they sit in the compliance team. They're not within my department. And their role is one of really a financial intelligence team. So they manage the receipt and submission of suspicious activity reports, money laundering related issues. I'm not aware of them having been involved in shortfall issues.
And in respect of, say, submitting a case to a law enforcement agency where the post office or a sub-post office has been the victim of a crime, would that not go through that team? Would that go through your team?
If post office is requesting assistance or reporting a crime, then that will be through my team, not through the financial crime team. But they do liaise with law enforcement, as I understand it, in terms of long-standing national money laundering projects, best practice around anti-money laundering, things like that. So they do deal with law enforcement, but on a more strategic or thematic basis.
Thank you. And then we come to the retail team, which is something we briefly addressed already. In terms of investigations into apparent shortfalls at individual branches, am I right to understand that that is now principally dealt with by that retail team?
Yes.
Who would you say is responsible for those investigations ultimately?
The retail team.
Who in particular?
So they all sit under Mel Park, and so she's ultimately accountable for those.
Thank you. You say at paragraph 11 of your witness statement that the retail team has supported postmasters to investigate discrepancies. The suggestion seems to be in that statement that their involvement only takes place if instigated by the sub-postmaster. Is that right, or do they carry out their own investigations?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think the vast majority comes through postmasters identifying through the review and dispute process or through the call centre. But I am aware of the market monitoring team, I think they're called, who look at patterns, and that might commission some work to be done within the retail space.
And does that team also fall within Mel Park's responsibilities?
It does, yeah.
Do you know which team will be responsible for pursuing sub-postmasters in the civil courts, should that happen?
I'm not aware that that's going to happen. If it would, I imagine it would start in the retail space, but I don't know because I don't think it's been approved or planned.
And there's no plan for your team to be directly involved in that, other than, for example, ensuring the consistency of the retail team?
I'm pretty sure we would be asked to do that were such activity to take place.
Your team, as you've described in your statement, is principally for high-risk investigations. What about more mundane, everyday investigations, low-level civil debts, or what appear to be debts to the post office caused by, for example, apparent discrepancies?
No, we're not involved in those.
So when you say it would likely be your team that pursues sub-postmasters in the civil courts?
No, that's not
Sorry,
correct.
that was my understanding of your
No,
evidence.
we would probably be requested to assure the work of whichever team, if it happens, would be conducting that activity. So we would be the second line of defence in that regard.
So your involvement would be one of assurance, not of direct involvement?
I believe it would be, yes.
Thank Now, we've looked at various teams, the A&CI team, security team, retail team, and you've said that we've looked at particular individuals in the security team, and they are still in various roles relating to postmasters. Does anyone involved in the historic investigation of sub-postmasters relating to shortfalls, does anyone there still work for your team?
No, not at all.
Does anybody who was historically involved in investigating apparent shortfalls work in the retail team, as far as you're aware?
Not that I'm aware.
How about the financial crime team?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. In terms of outside firms, you've mentioned in your witness statement, you say at paragraph 31 that A&CI non-criminal work is supported by nominal full-time equivalent staff in external firms assisting Post Office. Can you assist us with what that means?
Yes. So due to capacity issues within the team, i.e. availability of staff within the team, we regularly engage law firms to conduct investigations either as an extension of our team or more frequently where we feel the investigation would benefit from being conducted entirely by an external party. And that's when we engage law firms or professional services firms that have capability like that.
So law firms, accountancy firms possibly?
Yes.
Any other type of firm that you can think of?
Sometimes barristers in an individual capacity, but they're often engaged via a law firm.
Is there any mechanism in place to ensure the quality of the service that they provide?
So those investigations have the same level of oversight as if we were conducting them. So they will report into probably a SEG member, so a Strategic Executive Group member. There will be a terms of reference that would have to be agreed by that SEG member. That SEG member will be advised by probably the General Counsel or the Group Legal Director. And there may well be other senior members of staff as part of that oversight group. We're trialling on 2 investigations, something called an investigation oversight group as a concept for our most high-risk cases, and that's how that operates.
We've heard in previous phases of actions on behalf of the Post Office being farmed out to external firms like Cartwright King,
Yes.
etc. I mean, is there any large-scale farming out under your team?
Not large scale in terms of volume of numbers, because we don't deal with volume of numbers. We're a relatively small caseload, certainly compared to how it was in the past that's relevant to this inquiry. We're not on the same scale at all. So I would say no, it's not. They're frequent, and percentage-wise, yes, we do engage a lot because we're a small team, but it's not at scale.
What proportion of your cases end up at an external firm?
Not for non-criminal cases. I'm not entirely sure. It'd be less than half.
And for criminal cases?
None.
Thank you.
Sorry, was that none?
Yes, sir.
None.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I'd like to look at...
Just so I could understand this process, I think I've got it, but let's use an example. The inquiry knows that Mr. Reid was subject to an investigation, which ultimately, I say ultimately, the last step in the investigation was by a barrister, Ms. Tutin. So is this what would have happened in practice, that it would have come first to your team because that would have been a high-profile investigation, but in that instance, you or someone on your behalf decided that an external law firm should be involved, a firm of solicitors, who in turn instructed Ms. Tutin, and then she made her report back. Is that it in summary form?
That's a proper description of the process, sir, yes.
Fine, thanks. Yeah, okay.
I'd like to look at the oversight of your team's work. Could we please turn to poll 004477971? This is a team organogram. It might be difficult to see, but if we could just look at the top, thank you. If we could focus on the top half. Is it possible to zoom in a little more? We can see your name is on the left-hand side. Thank you very much. The third row down. Can you see your name there?
I can.
And it appears that you report to Sarah Gray, who is now the interim general counsel.
Correct.
I don't believe she reports to Ben Folk currently.
Not currently.
No. Am I right to say there's no direct line from yourself to the group executive?
Sarah sits on this SEG, so I would say that's the link there.
Thank you. So essentially, Sarah Gray is responsible for your team insofar as the executive level is concerned.
Correct.
Who do you consider to be responsible and accountable for your team at board level?
That's in two ways. So we have a Speak Up champion, who's a non-executive director, Amanda Burton, and we also have an investigations non-executive director champion, who is Andrew Darford now. So I report into them. They're monitoring what we do.
And do they speak on your behalf at board meetings?
I believe they have, yes.
Thank you. And if we zoom out, please, we can see that there are, including you, 18 members of staff here in your team. Is that the current position? Has that changed?
No, I think we're one fewer.
So 17, including yourself?
Including the Project Phoenix team, yes. If you take them out, I think it's 9.
Thank you very much. If we could take that down, please. I want to move on to the KPMG report and focusing in particular on the issue of training, but we'll look at their findings. We've already looked at them in the inquiry, so I'm not going to take a great deal of time going through every individual one. You've set out their key findings at paragraph 17 of your statement. Could we please turn to poll 0042367. This is the Project Birch report. And that was commissioned and also produced prior to you joining the post office. Is that correct?
That is correct.
We see there at the bottom, 13th of August 2021. Was this a document that was brought to your attention pretty soon into taking up the role?
Day one.
Thank you. If we could scroll down, please, to page 4. We see there the context. I'll very briefly take you through that. Whilst the Post Office no longer bring private prosecutions, it continues to perform a variety of investigations as required across its business. The Post Office's vision is that these investigations be conducted to the appropriate standard by appropriately qualified individuals and adhere to the market practice with the necessary records created, maintained and retained so that the Post Office can discharge all its obligations now and in the future, including those required by statute. And it sets out there that the Post Office engaged KPMG to undertake a review of its current investigative process as set out in our terms of engagement dated the 30th of June 2021. What was your view on receiving this?
I think it was the basis of the establishment of the team that I was asked to build, and their recommended approach seemed to make a lot of sense. A centralised function. It's something I've seen in other corporate entities, and it seemed logical.
Thank you. Could we please turn to page 10, and it sets out there the executive summary. As I said, we've been through these before, so we'll speed through them. first significant bullet point there on the right-hand side, investigations are not conducted consistently across the post office. Is that the very purpose for the establishment of your team?
Yes, particularly the assurance piece of my team.
Thank you. If we scroll down, please, we see more bullet points over the page. A lack of overarching governance and oversight over high-risk investigations. Again, that's essentially the purpose of your team, isn't it?
It's one of them, yes.
There is no clear, consistent triage process in place across the post office. Lack of consistent monitoring and reporting over all investigations. There is no consistent approach to quality assurance across the business teams. There is limited evidence of lessons learnt and continuous improvement arising from investigations across the post office. Over the page, please. Business teams often use area managers and line managers to conduct investigations. There's a lack of training in respect of investigations across the post office. There's no consistent use of an investigations case management tool across the post office. And that's the final substantive recommendation or observation. In your view, have all of those been addressed?
Yes, the first bullet point about use of area managers and line managers in a grievance context, so within the ER area, that still takes place, but that's outside of the remit that my team has. So for fact-finding, for accountability investigations, and for any criminal ones, area managers and line managers are not used. Training, we're beginning to address. There's more to do there. And we've just got a new case management tool.
If we scroll up to the bullet points above, how about in respect of those?
Okay, so quality assurance is absolutely underway. I think there will probably be more teams that we are asked to assure, but at the moment we're at capacity in terms of teams, but there is a consistent approach to that that's been validated by the group assurance function. Lessons learned, we have a process now where lessons learned from investigations are collated by group assurance and followed through by them. Monitoring and reporting, we've centralised investigations to a greater extent, and we operate a triage function within my team.
And if we scroll up, I think we've addressed the first. Is there anything additional you'd like to say about the first bullet point in implementation?
So all the assurance work in non-A&CI teams, of non-A&CI teams, one of the drivers for that assurance work is to drive consistency. And so, yes, that is being dealt with.
Thank you. You've highlighted in your witness statement, in particular, the training issue. Is it your view that of all of those bullet points, the training is the one that you're the most far behind in implementing?
Refresher training, yes.
You explained that there have been delays in getting it up and running. Is that correct?
Yes, we've engaged with... I think the focus of the questions that I was asked to answer in my witness statement was primarily focused on criminal investigations. So in terms of refresher training or primary training for investigative work around the criminal conduct is behind, but we've been engaging with the College of Policing, and 2 of my staff are doing fraud investigation apprenticeships.
Is the plan for you to adopt College of Policing training, a package?
Absolutely.
I think it was 2.5 years after this KPMG report that approach was made, or the first meeting took place with the College of Policing. Is that correct?
So it was a year after my team started.
Okay. And can you assist with why that took so long?
There's a lot of other things going on, and we were trying to work out what requirements the post office had around criminal investigations, because that would determine the nature of the training that would, or refresher training as well, and ongoing training that would be required.
And is the current position that there is not yet a training programme in place?
No, we've had a needs analysis completed by the College of Policing. They've proposed a training package which we would like to do, and we're just waiting for a formal offer, if you like, of what that training would be, both upfront, refresher and ongoing. But as soon as we can get that in writing, we'd like to agree it.
And when do you expect that to take place?
I don't know, that sits with the College of Policing at the moment.
So you're waiting on them to put forward the proposal?
They've given us a provisional proposal, which we've given positive feedback on, and we're just waiting for it formally now.
You know, are we talking months, years?
Well, certainly not years. I'm hoping 1 or 2 months.
That's the College of Policing, so presumably they can assist with the legal issues relating to the preservation of evidence and matters such as that. What about covering, for example, the interpretation of horizon data, how to analyse horizon data? How is your team going to be trained in that?
So one of the aspects that we asked them to look at is whether or not the transaction analysts, I have 2 in my team, whether their methodology could be accredited or approved by the College of Policing. They're still looking into that aspect as to how that could happen, but that is something that we would like the College of Policing to do.
And who provides them with training as to what it means, what the printout from the Horizon system means, what the data, the ARQ data, for example, from Fujitsu means? Who assists them in understanding that?
So one of the 2 came from the Tier 3 retail team. So he had all of their training and experience, and he's brought that in, and he's effectively mentoring the other transaction analyst, who is an experienced intelligence data analyst from HMRC.
And what about investigations of underlying problems with the Horizon system itself? How is your team going to be trained to be able to interrogate the Horizon system or to properly understand issues such as bugs, errors, defects in the Horizon system?
So there is a process and guidance for doing that within Tier 3, within retail. We follow that practice and that experience. But ultimately, if it's something that we're not sure about, then we can approach Simon Oldnall's team, the Horizon IT team, in the first instance, and seek their advice. We have done that on other technical data sets before, and it's worked very well.
And in terms of the training that's provided by, for example, the College of Policing, how are you going to link that up with the wider teams that are involved in investigations, such as the retail team that you've spoken about?
So we will build in any developments or new processes or procedures that we get from that training. We will consider it for inclusion in our assurance work, and it will be through the assurance work framework, so the assurance framework, that will percolate into the retail teams.
So are we to understand it, for example, your team go to a training session with the College of Policing, they'll have that training, and then they will then train the teams below them or the other teams in the business?
Yeah, so depending on the significance of any changes or new approaches, we can either the plan will be to either give an actual training session, probably starting with the team leaders in retail. But in any event, it will be considered as to whether it should be folded into the multiple sets of criteria that we have agreed with each of the different teams that we assure.
I appreciate that you haven't been at the post office for all that long, but is it disappointing that these kinds of changes to training haven't already been implemented?
Yes.
And where would you say responsibility for that lies?
I'm not sure I can place that at any particular person or group's door, but I think what I can say is I'm not sure Post Office in 2019 thought they needed to understand what had gone wrong in the investigation process. I think that is evident. And the reason I feel I can say that is Project Phoenix was not commissioned then when perhaps it should have been.
I know that you've said that's a broader concern, but are there any particular individuals who you would say that responsibility lies with?
I wouldn't know. I wasn't in the Post Office then, I'm afraid.
Was it something that you understood when you came into the business, that there was that lack of introspection?
I think the fact that a CIU was required and authorised was indicative of a change of approach, that there was a recognition that professional investigations were required, capability was required, and that it needed to be conducted not by people entirely brought through Post Office.
And who, in your view, was responsible for that change in approach?
Sarah Gray and Ben Fote.
I'd like to move on to various policies and procedures. You've addressed the investigations policies, the two current key investigations policies at paragraphs 48 to 49 of your witness statement. They are the Group Investigations Policy, the GIP, and the Cooperation with Law Enforcement Agencies and Addressing Suspected Criminal Misconduct Policy. Is that correct? That's the CLEP.
Known as the CLEP, yes.
Thank you. Those policies date back to 2021, is that right?
That's correct.
And they predate your joining.
They do.
And there is now a new policy that is being developed that's known as the Group Investigation and Cooperation with Law Enforcement Policy, the GICLEP.
We refer to it as the proposed combined policy, but yes, it's that.
So in effect, combining those two previous policies, the GIP and the CLEP,
yes,
to create a single unified policy.
Correct.
Could we please turn to poll 00448-353? Is this the current draft of that policy?
Yes.
Yes. So we see there version 2.2, but it's still a draft for comment. What stage of development do you say this policy is up to now?
So just to clarify, this is the current CLEP?
Yes.
Yes. So that is in force. I don't know why it has draft on it.
Thank you. So this is the CLEP,
Yes.
not the GICLEP.
I would need to see the next page, but looking at that.
Even though it's called Group Investigations and Cooperation with Law Enforcement Policy, we can scroll over.
Apologies. Yes, you're right. That is the proposed new document. My mistake. Sorry.
So this is the combined policy.
This is the combined document.
And what stage do you say it's called a draft? On the front page it says draft for comment. What stage do you say this is currently at?
It's a discussion document.
Discussing with who?
Board and SEG.
And has it gone to both of those groups?
They've discussed some of the concept in them. I have provided it to both groups, and in 2 weeks' time it's going to be discussed by the board, and next week it's being discussed by SEG.
Do you expect that it will be adopted in its current form?
I think SEG will support it. I'm not sure about board.
And why are you not sure about the board?
Some of the feedback or commentary on one or two parts of this that I've had would suggest that one or two of the members of board want to discuss it further. So therefore, I don't think that they will, without those discussions, want to say, yes, go through the governance process to have it approved.
And can you assist us with what in particular their concerns are?
Yes, I think in particular is the element around changing the current requirement that the CLEP has for board to approve the provision of certain types of evidence to law enforcement.
And this policy would make it easier for your team to pass information to law enforcement without board approval, is that right?
It would remove the requirement to go to board. It would put in place a different governance structure around that material being passed. But yes, it would. We would notify board of what's happened. That's clear in the feedback that I've had from the chairman, for example, that that's what he would like. The feedback I've had is that the chairman would approve that change in responsibility, but they would like to know volumes, trends, characteristics.
And can you assist us with who at board level is not happy for that change to take place?
Elliot Jacobs, one of the postmaster Neds.
Just him?
He's the only person I've been aware of with feedback.
Thank you. Could we bring up onto screen your second witness statement? It's WITN 111-90200. And I'd like to look at page 6 and into page 7. In your statement, you have identified some criticisms that have been made from the group litigation and from the Hamilton appeals, and you've identified and set those out in your statement. I'd just like to take you through those, and really my question is how this new policy addresses those criticisms.
Okay.
Thank you. So it's paragraph 14. You say there the GLO judgments and the decisions of the Court of Appeal in Hamilton and others were critical of the Post Office's approach to investigations, specifically in relation to apparent shortfalls and discrepancies shown by Horizon. In particular, and in summary, those criticisms included: A, the Post Office operated with the presumption of culpability. Is that addressed in your new policy, and if so, how?
Yes, it's pretty explicit in there that you have an investigative mindset, which is open. You make no presumptions of anything, and you follow the evidence and lines of inquiry, including towards or away from any investigative hypothesis that you might have.
B, that post offices provided insufficient information to postmasters who had shortfalls during the investigation and before and during proceedings. Again, is that addressed, and if so, how?
I think that's principally addressed in the processes within the retail teams that look at shortfalls.
So the responsibility for addressing that you see as lying with the retail team?
Yes, but what I would say is if we had cause to investigate anything like that, we would make that information available if it's a criminal matter to the police, for example.
And how about making it available to the sub-postmaster, say, if a sub-postmaster is being investigated?
Well, we wouldn't investigate a sub-postmaster for anything other than something that might be criminal, and we don't investigate people anyway. That is a principle within the policy, is that we investigate circumstances or events. We don't investigate people.
I mean, do you have guidance as to how much information should be given to a postmaster if they are going to be investigated
So that
for criminal conduct?
For criminal conduct, well, the police carry those investigations, not us.
But you carry out a level of investigation to identify whether it's sufficient to
Yes.
provide to the police.
Yeah.
Part of that might include an interview, for example.
No.
That's not the case.
No, we don't do interviews with postmasters.
Is that not part of the proposal in the new policy?
No.
Okay, well, we'll get to that, and we'll have a look at the section on investigations.
So it's worth noting that this policy isn't just about doesn't just cover investigations into postmasters, it's any investigation. So the piece about interviewing,
Yes.
or it is interviewing, interviewing people largely relates to post office limited staff. We do not do so as the proposed policy is explicit, which the previous policy wasn't, is we will not do interviews under caution.
Thank you. If we scroll down, see that there was poor communication with postmasters throughout an investigation, with the outcome that postmasters were unable to examine the issue themselves. Is that something that's addressed in the policy, and if so, how?
Yes, so if you take the investigations conducted in retail space or to some degree within the contracts team, they should be sharing information with the postmaster as they go along or at the conclusion of their reporting, to the extent that the dispute resolution team, when they produce a report following their investigations, they consider that they're writing those reports for the postmaster.
Thank you. D, that there were failures to follow all reasonable lines of inquiry, including potential alternative explanations provided by postmasters.
Yes.
Is that addressed, and if so, how?
So it's covered in more detail in the investigator's manual, which is the aid for people conducting investigations. It's not a policy, it's a guidance document. But yes, lines of inquiry is essential.
And how is that addressed?
I think it's in there as a policy statement, which is you will follow lines of inquiry towards or away from the investigative hypothesis.
E, suspicions of knowingly making false assertions relating to the reliability of Horizon data.
Yeah, so I think in the policy we talk about the purpose of an investigation is to establish the truth, not to achieve a particular outcome. And I think that fits in there.
And F, the Post Office failed to discharge properly the duties of a prosecutor, especially in respect of disclosure. Now, you're no longer the prosecutor, but how else is that addressed?
Well, we state we're no longer a prosecutor, and we say we will assist any prosecutor or investigations team in the discharge of their disclosure obligations.
And what do you see as your disclosure obligations?
Well, I think on a strictly legal basis, if we're not the investigating authority or the prosecuting authority, we don't legally have one under CPIA, but we adopt that as a concept. You know, it's something that we support, and we would provide whatever law enforcement want, to the extent that if they move towards the disclosure phase of their investigation prior to it going to a prosecutor, or a prosecutor moving to disclosure to another party, then we will give them everything we have.
When you say everything, what do you mean by that?
So the contents of the case file, and we will not apply any form of relevancy test.
I mean, a case file might include internal logs, internal comment. Is it envisaged that those kinds of things will be passed to the police?
Yes, well, I think we'd have to apply some common sense, but that would be in discussion with law enforcement. So we would open our file, I guess, in effect, to them, and then talk through what material we have, what material they want to consider as part of their relevancy test, and then we will give it to them.
Thank you. Are there any other significant changes made in that draft policy that you can point to that you believe will make a significant difference?
In there we talk about the retention of material. I think that's important. The material that is received or generated in the course of an investigation, and it shouldn't be restricted to criminal investigations, should be any investigation. That material should be retained, and we should be prepared to reveal it. So, for example, if there's an investigation that leads, not in my area, but in the contract space, for example, they should be prepared to show material evidence to postmasters or any other party that's there. So show them CCTV, show them analysis reports, witness statements, whatever is necessary. So it's I guess, the concept of transparency in investigations, and that transparency has to be based on the retention of material to begin with.
You've mentioned in terms of this policy that when it gets to board level, there will be some further discussion, at least in respect of one aspect. But why, in your view, has it taken so long to get to this stage and it's still not completed?
So part of it is volume of work within the team, principally at the my level and my direct reports. We've had a volume of operational work, investigative work, setting up the assurance function. Those meant that we had to deprioritise something. We couldn't do it all. So I had to deprioritise the formalisation of that policy.
We've heard evidence from some witnesses about a fear of decision-making and a fear of accountability within certain levels of the post office. Mm-hmm. To what extent has that contributed to these new policies not yet being implemented?
I think that applies to this as well.
And where do you say the responsibility lies for that?
SEG.
The Senior Executive Group.
Yes.
Thank you. You've mentioned the Investigator's Manual. Perhaps we could turn to that. That's POL 00448-014. This is a document that is in force. It has been approved, I think, in June 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, that's perhaps giving it a higher status or authority than perhaps it should have.
Because it's not a policy, it's a guide.
Correct.
This particular version is the 19th of September of 2023, version 1.1. Is that the most up-to-date version as far as you're aware?
I'm not sure. There is constantly, it's meant to be a living document. So it's not, there will be different versions. I know another one's being worked on at the moment, to some degree, but it's being paused pending the discussions in the next couple of weeks around the new policy, because obviously that will have implications for the guidance that's required.
And where does this sit with those other guides, other policies, that you've mentioned?
So it's not a policy.
Yeah.
This is a manual. It's not a procedural document. It's guidance. I think it's being described as a handrail for investigators.
But it presumably needs to be consistent with the policies.
Yes.
And will therefore be adapted as the policy adapts.
Yes, and of course policies are not how-to guides. Policies should be a statement of a particular position on an issue.
Thank you. If we scroll over the page, we can see how it's described in the forward. It's page 4. The Post Office is committed to doing things correctly. Our values and behaviours represent the conduct we expect. This expansive and detailed manual, its guides and templates supports those of our colleagues charged to help us ensure the highest standards of integrity, proper behaviour, crime prevention, detection and case management are maintained. Did you draft this, or presumably this is one of the first documents that you were involved in having joined the Post Office?
It was a team effort. So the team put this together. And then sections of it that relate to the operations in other teams. So, for instance, the retail teams, they had an input to and provided their elements of this manual.
Thank you. If we could scroll down and over the page to the introduction. We see there it says, this manual is intended to provide clear guidance on the considerations that must be made when conducting investigations. It is not intended to be a training manual for investigators. The manual prescribes the professional standards which the group expects of all those that undertake investigations on its behalf. Is this used not just by your team then, but by the other teams within the business who carry out the lower level investigations?
Correct.
could we please turn to page 16? And this is actually the section I mentioned before. I'd just like to spend a bit of time looking at interviews. It says there, this guidance applies to all types of investigative interviewing, not only to interviews conducted as part of a criminal investigation. The principles are based on ensuring fairness to interviewee, but also to facilitate an appropriately effective investigation. It sets out 3 different types of interviews that might be conducted. Witness interviews, conduct subject interviews, and something called criminal conduct subject interviews. It says a witness interview is conducted with persons who are able to provide testimony to the event under investigation or provide clarification on matters or systems relating to the investigation. So that's somebody presumably who isn't suspected of something. They might be a witness.
They can help the investigation, yes.
Thank you. A conduct interview is conducted with a person suspected of breaching group policy or regulation, and there is no suggestion that a criminal offence may have occurred. Authority to conduct this type of interview must be obtained from the investigator's line manager, designated deputy. What does that mean by investigator's line manager, designated deputy?
So the interviewer's line manager, or someone that might be acting in their stead. So, for example, if the line manager is on annual leave or sick, then someone should be acting in that capacity.
So should that be line manager or designated deputy?
Yes, there should be a space between that R and the O.
Manager or, yes, thank you very much. A criminal conduct interview is conducted with a person who is suspected of committing a criminal offence and may be conducted by a police officer or appropriately trained, professionally qualified and experienced investigators within A&CI. Authority to conduct such interviews can only be authorised by the head of A&CI, that's yourself, or their designated deputy. When conducting interviews, IOs, what's an IO?
That's shorthand for the person that's conducting the investigation.
An investigation officer?
Yes.
Yeah. When conducting interviews, investigating officers must comply with the 7 College of Policing investigative interview principles. These principles apply to all interviews, whether part of a criminal investigation or any other form of investigation. So there is something called a criminal conduct interview, but as you have previously said, that's not something that you envisage taking place under caution. Is that correct?
So if it would help, I could explain the background to this section.
Yes, please.
So when we first were tasked to start the team in early 2022, there was consideration that our team might do interviews under caution in relation to suspected offences against Post Office. That affected the drafting of this. That intent changed, and so the new version of the manual, when we know where we stand in terms of what's expected of us, this section will entirely come out.
So in future, will you just have 2 different types of interviews or something else?
No, I think it would be a general witness who can assist us within the Post Office, or indeed outside of the Post Office. And then there'll be the, we call them accountability investigations. So anyone who, during the course of that investigation, might potentially be held accountable for an event that we were asked to investigate, but that would not include anything suspected criminal offence.
So if you were, I'm not asking you to redraft this right now, but if you could summarise what it might say in future once the proposal is passed, what do you envisage this will say in broad terms?
Okay, so I'm expecting us to adopt the general guidelines around how to conduct an effective, sensitive witness interview.
So those College of Policing investigative interview principles will stay, will they?
No, because they relate to the conduct of a criminal investigation. So we would look at things like, we can look at the ACAS guidelines, we can look at College of Policing do give guidance on dealing with, on interviewing witnesses, vulnerable people and witnesses generally. So we can look at drawing on that sort of material, but also the ACAS side, because we can balance that, those two approaches.
And will a person who's being interviewed know whether they are being interviewed as a witness, as somebody whose conduct is suspected of wrongdoing in some way, and whether here we have a third category, something even more serious than that?
Yes.
Will they be told the level of seriousness of that interview?
They are effectively already. So we do, because of our history, we tell people who might be witnesses of any type that they are not going to be interviewed under caution, because we want to be really clear about that up front so they don't worry about that and they know that this isn't going to result in a criminal issue. We say to them, we write to people who internally post office limited staff and say we would like you to meet with the investigator. That could be one of my team. It could be an external lawyer, for example, doing it, because we would like to talk to you about X, Y, and Z, which you think you could help us with. And then there are various bits about you can have a friend and stuff that goes with that. In terms of conduct, sometimes people might start as a witness, and then as the evidence evolves, that may change in that they may then be accountable for something that they've done, and that would be made clear to them during the course of that interview or any subsequent interview.
Is that not problematic? Because somebody may say things in an interview that they shouldn't be saying because they think you're interviewing them as a witness, when in fact your officer may have may suspect that they're more than just a witness.
Not outside of a criminal context, no, because I think you may go into an interview not really knowing what this person can tell you, or having one set of views based on what has been said by other witnesses, and then that might change during the course of the investigation. Bear in mind, we don't do the resulting output of any of those accountability type investigations. The worst case scenario is that we would make a recommendation that ER would conduct a code of conduct type investigation based on information we have gathered. So they would then have another opportunity to speak with ER and do it that way. But
ER being employee relations?
Yes.
I mean, is it not possible that you might pass on the information to the police?
We haven't seen any of those so far.
Right.
And I guess theoretically, yes, but on issues that are potentially criminal, we try not to deal with too many people that would muddy the evidential environment for the police.
How's that going to work in practice, though? Because let's say you have a sub-postmaster, you're not sure if they have been committing a crime.
We don't interview postmasters.
You won't interview any sub-postmasters?
Well, it's not our role.
Who's going to be interviewing sub-postmasters?
So potentially the contracts team.
Even for a very significant loss?
If there's no suggestion of criminality, it won't come to A&CI.
If there is a suspicion of criminality, what happens? You don't interview them, or you do interview them?
We don't interview them.
So they'll be interviewed by a tier below you that doesn't have the training that your team is provided with, because your team are the experts in investigations. They'll be interviewed by somebody who is not that top tier.
No. So as soon as a lower tier forms a suspicion, which will not be based on, well, it might be based on something that's voluntarily offered and saved to a call to the call centre. So that's them initiating contact. But my understanding is that tier 3, for example, do not speak to postmasters particularly, so they won't be interviewing them.
So you won't have a postmaster's account necessarily?
No.
And you will have to determine whether something is going to be passed to the police based on what?
So we'll have to, so all the alternative explanations are considered in tier 2 and 3.
But a postmaster won't have provided their explanation.
Well, they may have volunteered information or an account already, but my understanding is that tier 2 and 3 don't formally conduct an interview.
Can you assist us with the tiers? What is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3?
I think Mel Park explained that yesterday.
Can you briefly address that?
So the vast majority of issues, as I understand it, are dealt with at the call centre, and then the funnel sort of narrows, the pyramid narrows. So those issues that can't be resolved at that level are then escalated to tier 2. Most issues are dealt with there, and then a much smaller subset are then passed to tier 3, who are very technically capable, and then they are the ones that make referrals to us.
And although the guidance that we're seeing here refers to these various types of interviews, actually we should read into here somewhere that this only applies to people directly employed by the post office, or certainly doesn't apply to sub-postmasters.
In the main, yes. So there are a few occasions where the contracts team do speak with postmasters over potential contract breach issues, and what the purpose of this is for them is we would like them to apply the same concepts of fairness, transparency, sensitivity, disclosure, and openness in those document keeping, record keeping, and that sort of thing that you would have in another situation, so that they are treating the postmasters fairly in those discussions.
But those are discussions, not interviews.
Yes.
What determines the extent of an internal investigation prior to reporting something to a law enforcement agency?
I'm not aware that we've reported anything to law enforcement relating to an internal investigation.
How about the actions of a sub-postmaster, an apparent discrepancy, or something
So
like those lines?
we have had, so none of our, I think it's 16 cases that A&CI are currently working on that we've reported to the police. None of those relate to a cash shortfall.
And in those particular cases, how do you determine whether to pass something to the police or not?
So there is often information provided by another party. So, for example, we've reported a matter to the police where the postmaster has reported that a family member has run off with a bag of cash, cash pouch. We've had issues where we have taken a witness statement from a postmaster who was subject to coercive behaviour from a partner that has resulted in activity in the branch that has come to our attention. So we will seek to get that additional evidence, and when reporting the matter that affects post office, we would pass that information on as well, and that would form part of our decision-making process to do it.
Thank you. I'd just like to talk about two other policies very briefly before we take our mid-morning break. The first is the financial crime policy of July 2023. Could that be brought up on screen? That's poll 00447 947. This isn't your team's policy, is it? I don't think.
No, it's not.
No. In your statement, though, you have identified at page 14 there was an error. If we could turn to page 14, please. It's the bottom of that page in respect of internal financial crime / fraud. At the bottom there it says detective controls all reports received of or instances identified of internal fraud will be fully investigated, and where appropriate, Post Office will prosecute individuals. You've identified that as an error in that policy. Are you aware of that having been amended since it has been identified?
I know people were instructed to amend it. I don't know whether they have.
And the final document we'll go to before the break is the sub-postmaster contract. That's POL 000000254. So this is the standard sub-postmaster's contract. If we could please turn to page 71. This is an issue that's been identified and addressed with other witnesses, including Mr. Reid. We can see there that it refers at the top of the page to the investigation division. And if we scroll over the page, we can see, for example, it refers to inquiries by officers of the Post Office Investigation Division. It says in the bullet point 12, it says the Investigation Division does not inquire into matters where crime is not suspected. Is this out of date?
Absolutely. Sorry if I may, it might assist.
Yes.
In early August, I was asked by the lawyers who were reviewing postmaster contracts to come up with a new, better contract, fairer contract. I was asked to review sections of this, and I've asked for all of this to be taken out.
Is it surprising, given the level of scrutiny that has been taking place for years now on postmaster contracts, and on the policies and procedures of the Post Office, that has remained in there for so long?
Yeah, I think I was very surprised it was there.
Who, in your view, is responsible for that?
I don't know who actually owns postmaster contracts, I'm afraid.
Would it have been your predecessor who would have inputted into that?
I don't consider myself to have a predecessor. No. But I take your point. Do you mean the head of security?
Perhaps.
Okay. I imagine yes, partly, but I think postmaster contracts are likely to be owned in their totality in a different department.
Okay. Thank you. So that might be an appropriate moment to take our mid-morning break.
Yeah, fine.
Could we come back at 22, please?
Oh, no.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Mr. Bartlett, just to revisit that issue that we were just addressing before the break, does it say in the investigator's manual or in any of those policies that we've looked at that the Post Office won't interview postmasters?
It says in the new draft manual that we won't conduct interviews under caution. I'm not sure it goes down another level. I was thinking in the break perhaps we need to separate out in the investigation policy so that we can be explicit as to what applies to a postmaster linked investigation conducted in retail, for example, as opposed to in-house, post offices limited type people.
Has there been an explicit decision that Post Office will not interview postmasters?
There's been a decision that my team will not interview postmasters, yes.
And I think where we got to before the break was that the other teams wouldn't interview postmasters, they would have a discussion with them.
Yes.
Are you aware of any overarching decision that no interviews will take place with postmasters?
So my understanding of practice and policy within the retail space is that they do not do interviews.
There may be a degree of difficulty in practice in deciding whether what is in fact happening amounts to an interview or a discussion, right? Forget interviews under caution. That's clear. There has to be a caution. I understand your evidence on that. But how is anyone to determine when a discussion becomes an interview, Mr. Bartlett? You've got experience, I know, of both police and other regulators in respect of this. I mean, I'm familiar, obviously, with the situation in which an employee, let's forget sub-postmasters to take the heat out of it, has a discussion with an employer or is formally interviewed by an employer about various things. It's not an interview under caution. The employer isn't doing anything like that. But they are trying to get to the bottom of something, if I can put it in that way.
Yes.
In practice, how is the difference to be delineated?
I think it's very difficult to draw a distinction myself. It depends what definition of an interview that one would want to settle on. You know, is it a structured conversation with the objective of establishing facts or experience of a particular matter in hand? That could be one definition, in which case my view is that that will occur in the retail space. But it depends on what they mean, what is meant.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the example that I raised with you to understand the process in respect of involving outside investigators. When Ms. Tooting was speaking to Mr. Reid, I would expect that most people would call that an interview, not a discussion.
I agree, sir.
Right. So is it, I'm only asking completely open-mindedly, is it possible to, in a document like a manual or a policy, to actually lay down when a discussion becomes an interview, or vice versa for that matter?
It is very difficult, and I think there are a range of views as to when an interview is, what an interview is and when it is occurring.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I have some sympathy with that, having seen various manifestations of all this over 50 years. Anyway, I think the more important question for me is, can you foresee, this is not about interviews under caution, all right? I understand what's going on about that. But do you foresee any problem about there being the facility for investigators, whether part of your team or any other team, when appropriate, to interview someone?
I think in any other organisation, no, sir, I wouldn't. In post office, because of the sensitivity of the past, which I completely understand.
So what we're really grappling with is the fact that because of the history, people are very sensitive about what might be regarded as oppressive interviews. That's the reality of it, is it not? And so they're trying to do everything they can to avoid it.
Yes, and I think that it's something that the people who would be spoken with would like to avoid and are cautious about participating in. But absolutely within post office, there is huge nervousness about those sort of conversations happening.
Fine. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Blake.
No, it's been very helpful, sir. Can I just follow on, just to establish who is responsible at the post office for formulating an overarching policy that addresses that issue?
I think it would need to be a combination of different teams.
I mean, the way that I had understood your witness statement and your evidence was that your department, A&CI, essentially sets the overarching policy for investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And then that filters down throughout the rest of the business, and you ensure that the rest of the business, by your assurance purpose, you assure that the rest of the business essentially keeps the kinds of standards that your department sets.
Yes.
So is it not your responsibility and your department's responsibility to formulate the policy with respect to interviewing, or however you may call it, sub-postmasters?
I think we would play a central part in that, absolutely, but it needs to be a collegiate approach, because a lot of the staff that would need to do that would not be within my team. And I know that they would be uncomfortable in some situations in doing that. So I think it's something I can take away and discuss.
The Investigator's Manual is a manual that your team is responsible for, is that right?
Yes.
The Group Investigations and Cooperation with Law Enforcement Policy, the new policy, again, that is something that your team are responsible for.
For drafting, yes.
Yes. So wouldn't your team be responsible ultimately, however much consultation you carry out amongst other teams, wouldn't your team be responsible for a policy that addresses what to do in circumstances where a postmaster or their assistant is being interviewed?
Yes, once that policy is formulated and approved, then yes, we would.
And can you assist us with why such a policy is not yet in place?
Because of the sensitivities, so that particular element of the policy, or the policy generally.
Why there isn't a policy that sets out, for example, what to do if during an interview or a discussion you suspect somebody of criminality? Where does somebody turn to in the business, in the retail team, in the contracts team? Where do they currently turn to answer that question?
They would contact our team.
And your team currently doesn't have a policy. Why doesn't it have a policy?
Because the landscape is constantly changing.
What does that mean?
In terms of the expectation or appetite within the post office for investigations, it's not been yet nailed down to my satisfaction. There's also...
Isn't this an absolute perfect example of that fear to take things forward in the business? Because things are going to be sensitive forever if you let them.
No, I would agree with that.
Can you assist the chair with when such a policy might be implemented?
Not with a specific date, no, because we need to go back and consult with other departments, get their input, run it through the approvals process. It will absolutely need...
There's consultation, approvals processes in all of these policies. We're years down the line now.
Yes.
Can you say to the chair, when you anticipate that those various consultations will have developed a policy that relates to the interviewing of postmasters?
I can't say for certainty because I can't control that, but my ambition would be that we would have it done perhaps by the end of the calendar year or the financial year.
Which calendar year?
This calendar year.
I'd like to move on then to liaison with law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
The Post Office formally ceased private prosecutions on the 22nd of September 2020, is that right?
Formally, yes.
Yes. And I think you've said that they essentially didn't have a criminal trial for fraud, theft or false accounting after the second site report, so after the 8th of July 2013. Is that subject to, I think you've said there's a caveat in your witness statement that addresses an instance in 2015.
That's correct.
You've provided some data in your statement, paragraph 89 onwards. There are lots of caveats in the figures that you have provided, but broadly speaking, you have set out that there have been in the region of 328 investigations into alleged fraud, theft, or false accounting since the 8th of July 2013. Is that correct?
Yes, so 300, I believe it was 301 were done in the old security team whilst they thought that they were waiting for business to continue as they saw it.
So a much smaller figure that has been carried out under your team.
Correct.
You say that there have been in the region of 25 that have been reported to the police in that period. Is that correct?
That was correct at the time of writing the statement, yes. I'm sure that may have changed since writing the statement.
What do you consider the difference in those figures shows?
I think it shows that issues are being resolved in the retail teams now on a more equal, collegiate and open basis through the process that Mel Park oversees, that perhaps in the past went straight to a criminal investigation.
Do you think that those matters are being resolved through Mel Park's team?
Yes.
Do you know how many prosecutions have actually taken place, not just reported to the police, but actually taken place, either in respect of that particular time period or in respect of any time period that you're able to assist us with?
From matters that we've reported?
Yes.
None.
None. So there have been 25 reported to the police. None have actually reached the prosecution stage.
Not yet.
Do you anticipate that a high proportion or a low proportion of those 25 will reach that stage?
I don't think that I'm able to comment on that because I don't know what evidence the police have.
But I mean, if we take those 25, go back to 2013, some of them, presumably...
Not the ones we've reported.
So can you assist us? How many have you reported since your team has been in place?
I think that's the 25 figure, but I would need to check.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but am I right in thinking that these 25 cases are the ones that are summarised in your appendix, I'm calling it that, from page 105 onwards?
It's included in the appendix, so yes, I think with summary of others.
We've actually got, at the end of that, the last column of that analysis tells us if there's been a closure date, in other words, the case is over one way or another, or whether it's ongoing. As far as you're aware, is that still essentially the picture, or has it changed from the time you produce your witness statement?
I think it's broadly the same, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I'd like to look at a number of group executive report decisions and board decisions that relate to the issue of liaising with law enforcement. Can we please turn to poll 00447-975? We start on the 20th of April 2022, and that's a group executive report. You're listed there as one of the authors of this report, and it sets out the background to the establishment of what was then the Central Investigations Unit, the CIU. If we scroll down, we can see it says, following detailed assessment, KPMG concluded in their report of August 2021 that Post Office should create a Central Investigations Unit. The introduction of the CIU was to ensure Post Office-wide investigations would be properly planned, resourced, documented and executed, with lessons learned fed back into the business. KPMG also recommended a target operating model. Post Office decided to form a CIU, and the head of CIU was appointed on the 21st of February 2022. That's yourself.
Correct.
We're seeking approval to recruit the rest of CIU in line with KPMG's recommendations, and it sets out there what was required at that point in time. Paragraph 4 says all observations made by KPMG are considered as being met or adopted in this proposal, which is as follows. a virtual post office investigations branch develops a one-team approach to post office investigations, ensuring the application of best practice across the organisation. Is that in place?
Partially.
I mean, we spoke earlier of something overarching that ensures the consistency of all of the investigations. Was that the aim of that?
Yes, it was.
And when you say partially, why partially? If we scroll up, sorry.
That's okay. The intent at the time was to perhaps to have a more so to help to embed practice approaches. It's always good for different teams to have the same purpose and to relate well to each other and to understand the positions, and that was the idea of a virtual scheme. The business prefers a linear approach, which is reports come into the call centre, they go through the process of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 and come to us. And I think there was not the appetite within the organisation to have something called an investigations branch because of the history of the organisation. So when I say in part, I mean it hasn't landed as a branch, if you like, but the assurance, consistency of approach, methodologies has.
Thank you. So I don't know, I mean, what does the word virtual even mean?
Well, so not in the same management chain. So as opposed to a single chain of command with different teams reporting into the same hierarchy and up, what the virtual side is, for example, in Mel Parks' team, she has several team leaders that report into her, and she reports into someone different to who I report to. That's why it'd be virtual.
Thank you. If we scroll down, business-based decentralised teams conduct the highest volume and lower risk casework, with the CIU conducting the higher risk or more complex investigations. That's accurate, is it?
It is.
If we scroll down, it says there, the penultimate bullet point there, an alternative to private prosecutions is proposed to permit criminality evidenced by post office investigators to be progressed in all 4 nations of the UK in order to act as a deterrent and to seek financial recoveries. Can you assist us with what that means?
Where we have suspicion that a criminal offence may have occurred and that harm may have been caused to the post office because of that suspected criminal conduct, we should report it to the police.
Thank you. Seeking financial recoveries, and this is a term, or similar words are used in a number of other documents. To what extent is it necessary, in your view, to use the criminal justice system to seek financial recoveries, as opposed to, for example, a civil claim?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
We'll see in a number of places that there's reference to criminal prosecutions passing matters to the police in order, amongst other things, to recover money. Why, in your view, or is it your view that the criminal justice system is the appropriate place to recover money, and is it seen as more helpful than, for example, civil proceedings?
Okay. So, to be very clear, the purpose of engaging with the criminal justice system is not to recover funds. That's not the overriding purpose, but it is an output of the criminal justice system for any individual or organisation. So it wouldn't be to engage law enforcement in order to recover funds. In fact, I believe I said that in a SEG meeting and asked for it to be minuted.
And I think we'll come to that.
Okay. But it is a potential output. The reality of that producing much is low.
Thank you. Can you assist us? the authors are listed as yourself and Sarah Gray. Did you draft different parts, or are you ultimately responsible?
No, I did the initial draft, and then Sarah reviewed it and made amendments that we agreed.
Thank you. If we stay then on this page, and if we scroll down, I'd just like to ask you about the bullet point on this page. In this document, it's bullet point 5. We'll see it appears elsewhere as well. It says the Post Office Investigations Branch was the first recognised investigation unit in the world, dating back to near the foundation of the Post Office itself. It has an unblemished reputation. It gives its motto, gentle in manner, resolute in deed, which is very much in keeping with the intended approach of the new investigation function. Did you draft that?
I did.
Can you assist us with why it's thought that the investigations branch has an unblemished reputation?
Because that applied in principally, no, I'll phrase that. The security and investigation, or security investigations team that are responsible for the scandal was not what I was referring to. Here I was referring to earlier, much earlier iterations of an investigative capability within the Post Office.
Because plainly the investigations team that was part of the security team or was involved in matters that the inquiry has been investigating.
Absolutely.
It's not presumably your view that they have an unblemished reputation.
The opposite.
Yes. Could we please turn, we're going to move on slightly in time, could we please look at poll 00448-354. This is a group executive report of the 6th of July 2022. Am I right to say, I mean, they have quite similar wording, all of these reports, but they did go separately to the group executive. The one we just looked at was April 2022. We're now in July 2022. And the proposals are changing slightly, is that right?
Yes.
If we scroll down, we can see that the input that is sought from the group executive here is to approve, for onward distribution to the board, the following three things. First, that the post office staff, postmasters and postmasters staff, all being within the remit of the Post Office Investigation Branch. But as you say, that didn't happen, or there was no investigation branch.
No.
CIU to conduct criminal investigations, so that's your team.
Yes.
Mobilising a new partnership model with the relevant bodies across the UK to facilitate the investigation and referral of suspected criminal misconduct. If we scroll down, the executive summary is that CIU will be staffed from September 2022 and fully operational by January 2023. There's the proposal halfway down that the investigation branch remit includes post office and post office staff, postmasters and postmaster staff for a range of matters based on employment, ownership of property and practical factors. Although the investigations branch doesn't exist, do you see your own team's remit as including all of those?
Yes, but also the retail team.
As in, both of you have responsibility, or the remit of both your team and the retail team includes those individuals?
Correct.
Thank you. Post Office has no appetite to pursue private prosecutions. However, it is proposed that Post Office investigators conduct investigations into suspected criminality and to report what has been evidenced to law enforcement and prosecutors in all 4 nations of the UK, the rationale being to act as a deterrent and to seek financial restitution through the independent and external criminal justice system. Again there, slightly different wording, but there's the reference there to acting as a deterrent and seeking financial restitution. Do you have a view as to whether too much emphasis is being placed on financial restitution through the criminal justice system?
Too much emphasis in regards to in the document?
Yes.
Um,
In this document and similar documents?
no, because I think court-enabled confiscation and compensation is an established part, an accepted part of the criminal justice system, and so maybe an output from one of the CPS or whoever prosecuting,
Yes.
and a court finding guilt.
As a former police officer, do you think that you might put too much emphasis on the criminal justice system as being used as a route for example, financial restitution, as opposed to non-criminal courts?
No, because I've been out of the police longer than I was in the police. So my last law enforcement experience was 17 years ago. So I've had a variety of law enforcement roles since then.
And have your other roles involved the criminal justice system?
Sometimes, but not always.
Do you think that your focus might be too much on the criminal justice system as a mechanism to obtain financial restitution?
My commentary and connection to law enforcement is not to gain restitution.
Could we scroll down, please, to page 2? At 1.2, it seems there that the group executive agreed on the 20th of April 2022 to the forming of that virtual post office investigations branch. So what happened that meant that that didn't actually ultimately take place?
As the various phases of the inquiry progressed, members of the GE became increasingly sensitive. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I just mean they were generally more sensitive to the use of language. And so support for labelling, naming and acting as a collective function across cross functions lost its appeal.
You mentioned earlier parity with the retail team in certain respects in terms of investigation functions. Is a risk that now that that doesn't exist, that there is no overarching, or that that overarching oversight has been lost in some way?
No, I think the assurance work that we conduct is the practical measure of that.
Could we please turn over to page 5? Page 5 has a heading, Operating Model Criminal Investigations. And I'd just like to take you through a few passages from that. If we scroll down to 3.4, as a wholly government-owned corporation in respect of government funds, it may be viewed that we have a duty to investigate as well as report suspected criminal events to the relevant authority. We may be criticised for not doing so, particularly where the post office funds have been misappropriated, and so by inference public funds are lost, and where we seek only a commercial outcome to these events. For example, where evidence obtained via an investigation supports a suspicion of someone having defrauded the post office, they should be reported to the police irrespective as to whether or not the loss has been made good, so that credible deterrence may be established. Existing policies facilitates the reporting to police, but not the preceding internal investigation. This paper seeks the group executive's approval for CIU staff to conduct criminal investigations within the IB's remit and report these matters to police where appropriate and in accordance with the CLEP. It then sets out the operating model. It says, as a government organisation, Post Office is viewed by law enforcement differently from a privately owned company. It is unfortunately fact that law enforcement agencies deprioritise most reports of crime made by government-linked organisations if made in the traditional way. Can you assist us with that?
Yes, my experience outside of the post office, as well as within, is that police forces will prioritise the allocation of resources, investigative resource, to general members of the public first, which is, I think, is correct. Then there's sort of a hierarchy, unofficially, of who is assisted, and government-owned institutions come towards the bottom of that list. And so sometimes there is a struggle for law enforcement to adopt honestly held and submitted reports of crime.
And has that been your recent experience with the police?
Yes.
It says there is an expectation that a degree of self-sufficiency exists. Without recourse to private prosecutions, an alternative is required if the interests of post office, postmasters, our staff, our shareholder, and the public are to be protected. And then it makes the proposals. It says suspected offences with an element of criminal dishonesty would form the vast majority, if not all, of our criminal investigations and potential referrals. This would include theft, fraud of all types, and money laundering. These types of offences are those which most LEAs do not have sufficient nor sufficiently skilled resource allocated, and which are lengthy to investigate, often resulting in them not being prioritised. If we do not investigate these matters prior to referral, then the likelihood of preventing the loss of public money significantly diminishes, as does any deterrence factor. Jurisdiction is also relevant. Typically, authorities in Scotland are less inclined to adopt evidence collected by non-LEA investigators. England and Wales LEAs expect an almost complete case in an admissible format, and Northern Ireland is likely to be somewhere in between the two. Just pausing there, if the policy is to not interview sub-postmasters or their assistants, how can there be sufficient information to meet that almost complete case?
You can't, this is an example of how the environment has changed since I started in the post office and the appetite of the post office.
So is it your view, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, please do answer exactly in your own words, but is it your view that the not interviewing of postmasters is going to significantly limit the ability to take matters forward in the criminal courts?
I think it makes it more difficult for the police to adopt an investigation. I don't think it, and then it would sit with them. So for them to use the investigative tools that they have, that we don't and shouldn't have as a corporate, they need a basis in which to create, to open an investigation. And it would be easier for them to do that if an interview, for example, or other techniques are being used to gather evidence that they can consider.
England and Wales, it says the proposal is for a CEO letter to the what's now the Department for Business, and then on with a minister's endorsement, requests assistance from the Commissioner of the City of London Police Economic Crime Directorate to work in partnership with the CIU to investigate and then refer to the Crown Prosecution Service all strong cases of dishonesty-based offences above a certain level of complexity or monetary loss. A dedicated team to be formed within the City of London Police Economic Crime Department. Post Office or the Department for Business may be asked to contribute to the cost of the team. And then there are also similar proposals for Scotland and Northern Ireland. And paragraph 4.7 says, by seeking partnership working in this way, Post Office demonstrates that we do not operate as a victim, investigator and prosecutor. Conceptually, the police and the prosecutors will decide on the strength of evidence that they will or will not progress through the criminal justice system, not the Post Office. To get to that point, Post Office will need to collect admissible evidence to assist overstretched LEAs, and that requires competent, evidence-led, ethical investigators. Can you assist us with the current position insofar as that's concerned? Has there been, for example, letter sent to the City of London Police Economic Crime team?
As a letter was sent to the Chief Constable, the Commissioner of the City of London Police, and there is no dedicated team within the City of London Police, but they have agreed, because they also are lead force for fraud, and they oversee the fraud reporting position for the country, for England and Wales. They've undertaken to look at cases that come through action fraud that we report. That's the extent of that.
Has there been, one proposal is contribution from the Post Office to the cost of police investigations?
No, those discussions haven't taken place.
Scotland, Northern Ireland have matters?
So Northern Ireland, we're hopefully about to sign an MOU with them in terms of a single reporting point for Post Office. That's not an undertaking by PS&I that they will investigate everything we tell them or report to them at all, but it establishes a pipeline for Post Office to go to a single point of contact. In Scotland, we have a good informal working relationship with the Economic Crime Unit there, but again, that's just so that we have a single referral point into someone that understands the issues that we're dealing with. It doesn't affect their independence as an investigator, and it doesn't guarantee that those matters would be adopted as an investigation.
Thank you. Can we please turn to poll 00448321? And this is a meeting of the Group Executive Tactical Meeting, 3rd of August 2022. And we can see matters being discussed over the page, please. It says, investigation, Sarah Gray and John Bartlett. Did you attend this meeting?
Yes, it looks like me. I don't remember it particularly, but it says I attended.
Yeah. Let's have a look from the third bullet point down, if we could scroll down slightly. SG, so Sarah Gray, I outlined 3 approvals requested from the Group Executive. The remit in terms of the applicability of the CIU branch was not controversial. The part that was more controversial was the proposal in relation to the CIU conducting criminal investigations. To be clear, we're not looking for the CIU to undertake criminal prosecutions. We were proposing that the CIU undertook criminal investigations before referring. In terms of why we wanted to do this, we were a cash business, and £2.5 million has been identified as potentially being recoverable. Do you know how that figure was arrived at?
I don't think that's correct. So it is, I believe at the time it was true that the apparent value of loss to Post Office of the potential criminal matters that were afoot totaled £2.5 million, but it absolutely would not be recoverable.
Do you have an idea of what that current figure might look like?
Well, if you take it as not what could be recovered, but the total value of potential loss is about 3.6 million.
Thank you. If we scroll down NR, so Mr. Reid queried whether the culture was that people were back-footed due to the situation over the last 3 years. Ms. Gray replied that whilst the vast majority of postmasters were decent, honest, reliable people, in any big group there would be people who looked to take advantage of loopholes, and there was knowledge that there would be no deterrent. This was incredibly disheartening for employees who undertook the investigations, then saw the work go nowhere. Is that something that you had been experiencing?
No, I think that relates to the retail team.
Thank you. Ms. Gray referenced the legal duty the company has as an organisation in receipt of public funds to investigate and then refer suspected criminal conduct. We were not currently completely fulfilling this duty. And then it goes on to yourself. It says that you noted that Post Office's ownership structure and shared your view that we needed to be doing more when it came to criminal investigations. We could provide evidence to law enforcers and prosecutors to assist them. And then this is Mr. Mladenov noted that we could still recover losses via civil recovery. And it says that you agreed that civil recovery remained open to us, or we could pursue under the Proceeds of Crime Act. So we could ask law enforcement to ask the court for the criminal proceeds to be repaid to us. We would also assert that we were asserting the rights of postmasters when postmasters' staff stole from them. So Proceeds of Crime Act was likely the best way to recover monies. And this touches again on the same point that I made before, that it may be suggested that you were perhaps too focused on the criminal aspect rather than the civil aspect, but that's something that you don't agree with.
So that was a discussion about the Proceeds of Crime Act and recovery through the courts. So
yes,
that's what the discussion was about.
But Mr. Mladenov suggested, for example, that you could, that civil recovery could be the route to obtain recover losses.
Yeah.
And the focus from you seems to be on the Proceeds of Crime Act. What's your view on that?
Because the discussion was around court cases and the criminal court matters, and so that was the focus of the investigation, of the conversation.
Do you think there's been sufficient thought given within the business to actually using the civil courts to recover money that's owed to the Post Office?
I believe papers have been taken to SEG in relation to civil recovery.
Yes. And what role do you see you having in that?
I think, as we mentioned earlier, we might assure the evidence collection and testing of that evidence.
And what is your view as to whether civil recovery or using the criminal courts and the Proceeds of Crime Act would be more appropriate as a general policy?
That's a difficult one. Depends what perspective you come from, I think. So, for example, if I was a postmaster or postmaster's assistant and I was told that Post Office wanted to take me through a civil recovery process, I would be worried. The reason, because of history. And the reason being, I feel that, is that there would be no independent assessor of evidence between the Post Office and that material being introduced into a civil court.
So in essence, a civil process is adversarial, whereas a criminal process you have the level of the police involvement as well.
And a prosecutor, so it's two additional levels.
Thank you. We see there at the bottom, if we could scroll down, please. SG, so Ms. Gray noted that after encouraging a culture of speak up, we had seen allegations increase of fraud, theft, or nebulous financial crime. NR asked for more detail and also asked who was making the complaints. You advised that postmaster staff were reporting more than postmasters. So have you seen an increase in postmaster staff reporting crime?
We did at that time. It was the predominant category of reporting through the Speak Up service at that time. It isn't now. That's changed, but at that time that was the case.
And what is it now?
Behaviours at the senior level.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
So people, the predominant or a high number of reports through the Speak Up line at the moment are commenting or reporting poor behaviours at head of department level or SEG level.
And without going into any detail of specific complaints, can you give us a flavour of what those focus on?
They are often around bullying, harassment, not harassment, bullying, poor conduct, matters that would normally be dealt with in an ER context.
Thank you. The final bullet point there, in A&CI, I think that's Mr. Cameron's absence, Ms. Gray raised his concern regarding the reliability of evidence while we remained on Horizon. You replied that you could choose which data you relied on, and we would use the most reliable data. You further advised that speaking to MR's team, that's Mr. Roberts, is it? Martin Roberts?
Probably.
MR's team were not seeing any inherently unreliable data. Just pausing there. In this phase, we've heard some criticism of Mr. Roberts. Karen McEwen was critical of his abilities. The sub-postmaster non-executive directors also raised concerns about Mr. Roberts. Did you have concerns, or do you have concerns about Mr. Roberts' abilities?
I didn't interact very often with Martin Roberts, so I haven't seen a range. I certainly wouldn't know anything about his performance.
Do you know how he could have formed the view that they were not seeing any inherently unreliable data? I mean, what was your understanding at that time?
So that's through the application of the process in the retail teams, where they look for what bugs, errors, defects, calls to the helpline existed around those particular transactions that they were looking at.
So they look at helpline data?
I believe so.
NR noted that whilst he took Mr. Cameron's point, where we proceeded and handed over to law enforcement and prosecutors, it would be on the basis of having conducted sound and thorough investigations. If we scroll over the page, please. Thank you. You advised that you had spoken with Public Prosecutors Service and they were willing to work with us. What we wanted to achieve was a strategic relationship, as it would be the same officers who dealt with the cases. Is that what we saw earlier?
So that's what's missing from there is the Northern Ireland Public Prosecutor's Office.
So that was specific to Northern Ireland?
Yes.
Mr. Fote noted that it was important to emphasise that the case assessment, decision and conclusion would be performed by the external prosecutor. Post Office had a legal and moral obligation to provide the information of suspected criminal misconduct to law enforcement, and there was a public narrative that supported that approach. The group executive resolved to approve for onward forwarding to the board for noting that the Post Office staff, postmasters and postmaster staff all being within the remit of the Post Office Investigations Branch, CIU to conduct criminal investigations, and the mobilising of a new partnership model with the relevant bodies across the UK to facilitate the investigation and referral of suspected criminal misconduct. Are you able to assist us with why the group executive approved that to the board for noting rather than for active discussion at board level?
No, I can't.
Could we please turn to poll 004483320? So that was August 2022. By the 27th of September 2022, we have a board report. Is that the report that followed those discussions at group executive level?
Presumably.
We have you there as the author alongside Sarah Gray, and it says the board is asked to note, and that's exactly as we saw it in the previous document. And if we scroll down, we can see the recommendations in terms of the operating model at page 6 and 7 remain the same. And you've explained the ultimate decision that was taken in respect of progressing that matter.
Yes.
Could we please turn to poll 004483327? We're back at group executive level now. We're now in 2023, 28th of June 2023, so this is 9 months later, and you are reporting to the group executive in respect of prioritisation and resourcing of your department. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it says there the group executive is asked to agree the priorities for CIU for the next 2 financial years, so that takes us into now.
Yes.
And approve the additional funding recommended below necessary to service the current and projected investigations within these priorities. So by this stage, you've been given approval to carry out criminal investigations into criminal matters. Is that correct?
Correct.
If we scroll down, please, we can see a section over the page on prioritisation. It says the Post Office requires a business-as-usual central investigation function which is resourced to deliver quality investigations in priority areas at an appropriate scale and to assure the investigative capabilities of the dispute resolution, network monitoring and reconciliation and contracts teams. Financial crime, data protection and information rights, and ER investigations teams could also be assured in this way in the future. The Post Office also needs the central function to be able to flex in a way that allows it to deliver investigations required outside of and in addition to business as usual. The department is not currently resourced to deliver these demands. Can you assist us with that? What was meant by not currently resourced?
We were being asked to do more than we had capacity to do.
And is that capacity in respect of funding, in respect of manpower, or something else?
Predominantly staffing.
We'll get to, in due course, how things develop, but was this approved?
Not entirely.
In terms of additional resourcing, was sufficient resourcing provided?
No.
And why not, in your view?
Because the Post Office has a limited budget. It has to make difficult funding decisions. And on this occasion, it was decided that there were other priorities.
If we scroll down, I'd just like to read to you from paragraph 6. The intention to conduct a full network count of stock and cash prior to rolling branches onto MBIT will reasonably generate significant numbers of criminal investigations. CIU will be required to play its part in managing this investigative demand. CIU is not staffed to meet current requirements and certainly not a short to medium term increase caused by the move to MBIT. The rollout of MBIT will almost certainly generate significant casework for CIU during the all-branch audit phase. This is something we've heard some evidence on. So the idea is that once MBIT is up and running, all branches are audited.
Yes, I think the idea is so it's a fresh start on a new system.
Whilst this is difficult to precisely anticipate, if only 1% of the branches are found to have issues that need potential criminal investigations to resolve shortfalls or stock issues, then a potential circa 115 new cases will result. So is it still your anticipation that when the move is undertaken to the new system, NBIT, that there will be a significant number of new criminal cases?
I think it depends what the new system entails and what it looks like. So is it going to be a direct replacement, or is it going to be a different thing? I don't know at the moment. But if the presumption here at that stage was that it would be an entirely new thing rolled out, and therefore the audits would be required, and that it would remain the same if that becomes the case.
And when you say you don't know at the moment whether it will become a new thing or not, MBIT's relatively far down the line now, certainly in terms of the time it's being taken to be built. Are you sufficiently aware of those developments of MBIT to be able to forward plan?
Not at this stage, no.
And why not?
Because I'm not sure. I think the strategic review and the MBIT project are yet to settle on something firm to that level of detail, I think. I have provided this is what we would need from an investigative perspective in terms of data access and understanding things like that. So I have been engaged at that level.
Yeah. I mean, we saw from the reporting lines, you report to the Interim General Counsel. Do you think that you are sufficiently involved in the business, both structurally and in practice, to be able to input sufficiently into the NBIT system?
I mean, it's a technical project, and we are being consulted and we're providing an input in terms of, from a practical point of view, once it's in place, what we would need in terms of data to be able to perform our role.
how about the concern that's being raised here? Do you think the business sufficiently understands the resourcing impact that the audit, the all-branch audit, for example, or simply the new system might place on you?
I believe so. It was evident in this paper. And it wouldn't just be CIU that would need to be involved. There would be many operational teams that would need to be involved in that rollout.
Could we turn over the page, please? And there's a section there on MBET rollout and assisting the reset. It says, all suspected thefts/frauds to be passed to CIU, who will then triage them and report as necessary to the police. Where a report is for amounts in excess of £100,000, then CIU will provide active investigative support to the police. Where the sum is below £100,000, CIU will form a link between the Retail Central Operations Investigations Team and the police to facilitate the obtaining of evidence and the witness statements by the police. Is that still the intention?
I think it would be the start point. There is no plan that's cast in stone at this stage.
Don't want to pin you down on dates again, but when do you anticipate that a plan might be in place?
I think it would depend on what the target rollout date is, and I don't know what that is.
Is there a risk by placing this value threshold, say £100,000 goes to your team, below that goes to another team, of some two-tier system developing within the post office with respect to investigations?
So this is in terms of, so what it says here is that we would provide active investigative support to the police for over 100,000, but we would introduce the police investigators for other matters below that 100,000 direct into the business.
Yeah.
So you're still having police look at all of those matters, so that's the same. The difference is the level of involvement from my team, but it is a two-tier system.
And do you think the 100,000 mark draws a line appropriately?
I think that flexes depending on, well, it's a start point. It's slightly arbitrary, and at the moment we apply the same level within our teams at the moment, but we flex it depending on available resource and what matters are requiring investigation.
If we look down to business integrity operations, 1, protection of public funds, it says investigate all suspected theft and fraud offences against the post office and manage the interaction with police for cases over the value of £100,000. For matters below £100,000, CIU will manage the reporting process to the police, but the police will need to deal directly with other police teams. Sorry, yeah, that's...
Poll teams.
The second bullet point there, provide support to case building and testing of evidence for civil recoveries over £50,000. Matters below £50,000 would need to be supported by external counsel, for which there is currently no funding or not proceeded with. Can you assist us with that?
At the time that this was written, there was work underway to look at whether civil cases was an option. And as I mentioned earlier, the anticipated involvement of A&CI, or CIU as it was then, would be to effectively provide quality assurance over the evidence that had been collected.
And at that point in time, there was currently no funding. Is there funding for that, and what's currently envisaged for that?
I don't believe there is funding. I think it's still a concept under discussion.
Thank you. Could we please turn to poll 00447-948? There's then discussion of this paper at the group executive level on the 28th of June of 2023. Sarah Gray is present at this meeting. Were you an attendee? Pardon?
Sorry, I was just thinking. I don't know. I'm not listed as having attended.
If we turn to page 6, it has your name, but it may be that your name is on the paper rather than attending it. Let's see. Actually, no, it does mention JB, so let's have a look. If we scroll down, please, to the bottom of page 6, it appears that you were at the meeting.
Okay.
It's over the page, sorry. It's internal page 6, or our page 6. Central Investigation Unit Resourcing. If we scroll down.
Oh, yes, so I'm noted there as attending, but not at the top.
Yes. It says, JB, so that's yourself, spoke to the paper outlining the request for additional resource to service the backlog of investigations which was increasing, and also to bring additional support ahead of the rollout of MBIT, where there could be a number of referrals to CIU, and it sets out there even if the 1%, that's exactly the same as in the paper itself. NR, so Mr. Reid queried, how would you prioritise business as usual work in your team? You replied referencing the prioritisation as set out in the paper. KS, I think that's Catherine Sherratt, clarified that the ask was an increase in budget. Sarah Gray replied that it was, however, outlined the potential financial payback in future years. You noted this and shared your view financial savings should not be the basis for the decision, and that's the point I think that you were making in your evidence earlier.
Yes.
It was only one element. KS advised that whilst the group executive did not appear to disagree with the ask, that there needed to be understanding as to where this money would come from in the budget. Over the page, please. TM, that's Mr. McGuinness, queried whether a scaled-up CIU team was part of path clearing and NBIT preparation. Mr. Mladenov replied that the additional resource in the CIU team required for NBIT should be charged to NBIT. You contributed that it was not simply an issue of scaling up the team, it was a matter of matching resource to task. What do you mean by that?
So there are sort of two approaches to team staffing and remit making. One is you decide what you want to achieve and you resource it properly, or you decide what your resource is and you task reasonably what that team can deal with. We had neither of those.
You raised a concern around fairness to postmasters in relation to the capacity of CIU. For example, suspended postmasters would remain suspended until the CIU had capacity to address the case. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, I was talking hypothetically that if a matter was referred to CIU for us to investigate because there was some suspicion of dishonesty, and if as a consequence of that referral, the contracts team had suspended a postmaster, a case sitting on our books because we don't have enough people to deal with it is unfair.
Action. KS noted similar requests for additional funding that had been and were coming to the group executive, and advised that the group executive needed to devise a process to deal with these requests as the year went on. She advised that she was happy to take an action to think about the best way to process these requests. And you have there the group executive resolved that the priorities for CIU for those financial years are approved, and in order to prepare for and manage anticipated pre-NBIT rollout branch audit matters, additional funding in the amount of £360,000 to provide the resource as set out in the paper is hereby approved, but then says the group executive declined to approve the other additional funding requests in the paper at this time. Where did that leave matters, and have matters changed since then?
So that the 360 for the MBIT was to come from the MBIT budget. So it's to use an existing budget to pay, if required, whenever we got around to doing the MBIT rollout, that we could provide that support to that programme, which in effect meant no extra money was being assigned out of the normal post office budget because it was MBIT budget. So where that left us was I didn't get any additional resource, and to point you've made previously, which is this is an example of no decision making.
Is it still the position?
I've had some additional, I think, to fixed-term contract provision since, but I don't have a team start. Going back to those two options, we don't have enough people in the team to comfortably deal with, in a way that won't break my people, what's been asked of us. And we're spending a lot of money on external lawyers to do that work that we can't do.
When you say external lawyers, we spoke much earlier about using external firms. Yes. In respect of what work, and how actually is that a saving to the business?
It isn't a saving to the business.
Why is it, in your view, that funding can't be extended to your team in the way that you're asking?
So we get funding on an outcome actually from what Catherine Sherritt is talking about in this paper is that operational expenditure committee, I think it's called, was established, which is a central point for all teams within the organisation to go to when they've got unexpected funding requests. So that was a positive outcome. It was centralised, it was more coordinated. And when we have an investigation where we feel there's a need to go outside to have law firms or whoever, accountancy firms, to conduct that investigation, we go there and we ask for the money. And that is, so far, always been authorised. But what hasn't been authorised is a permanent increase in the headcount within my team. So initially, those two extra investigation managers that I mentioned earlier, they were to be permanent. They were authorised to be permanent, and then it was downscaled to being temporary on a fixed-term contract for a year. So I think I can understand a commercial decision being let's not increase an ongoing expense. It might be simpler to, or more expedient to have a temporary increase in cost.
Thank you. There's one final document that we'll go to before the lunch break, and that is at poll 00458-015. The document we've just been looking at is June 2023. This is now October 2023, and it's a Post Office Board meeting. If we could please turn to page 117. 117. Sorry, it might take a moment to come up. If we go over the page, perhaps. Thank you. This is a document dated, it's a board report, 31st of October 2023. It's written by you. I'm just going to read to you from the input sort and the executive summary, and this is something that we spoke about earlier today. The board is asked to approve, in line with policy, to pass evidence to Police Scotland, and two, for the board to discuss the pros and cons of a policy change which would allow a more confident handling of Horizon data and its provision to law enforcement. The executive summary says, Post Office's current investigation policy, cooperation with law enforcement policy and legal playbook requires board sign-off to permit the passing of HNGA Horizon evidence to the police to support their investigations, where the Post Office may be the victim of a crime. In line with this policy, board sign-off is sought for the passing of evidence to the Police Scotland relating to, and that's a particular case.
Yes.
Following the implementation of robust processes and the hiring of highly experienced staff, a change to the current policy and playbook is recommended. This would remove the necessity for board approval prior to the provision of evidence to the police where the Post Office suspects that they have been a victim of crime, and allow more efficient sharing of evidence with police. Can you assist us with the purpose and the background to this?
So it's twofold. The first request was in a compliant way, policy compliant way, that the board approved the passing of evidence to Police Scotland on a case that they were investigating. So that was the first one. And then it was to elicit, views from the board as to what their views would be about a change of process in terms of authorising future passing of evidence to law enforcement.
And can you assist us with how this developed at board level, whether it was approved or not approved?
So they approved the passing of that in compliance with the policy of that particular piece of evidence to the police. And then there was a discussion in the board that did not approve but wanted further discussion about the change in authorisation levels.
And do you understand why it was not approved?
It was very difficult to tell during the course of that board meeting. It wasn't the best run board meeting. People were talking over each other. It was a struggle to understand the different views that were being said at the time. But I think the underlying objection for those boards, so some of the boards supported the change. Others didn't. Others, I think, were unsure. And so they agreed that they wanted more discussion about it. But I think those that were in the no, we shouldn't change group, I think they felt that what would be passed would be would be data that could be considered to be unreliable, that they still viewed or felt that it could be viewed that the data was flawed.
We'll get to... Sorry.
So that meeting is what, sorry?
The 31st of October, 2023.
2023. And sorry if you agreed to ask this question, Mr. Blake, but this actual issue is still under debate in October 2024, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Right.
You said not very well run. Can you assist us with that? Who was running it at that stage?
Henry Staunton was the chairman.
And what did you identify as the issue with regards to how it was run?
There was no structure or control over the conversation.
Were there particular tensions between particular groups?
Yes, so I think the group that felt that it was appropriate for a change were disagreeing with the group that felt that there shouldn't be a change, and they weren't really listening to each other.
If we go over the page, please. We see there, it says the current group investigation policy was written during the long hiatus from 2015 to 2023, where the Post Office did not conduct investigations nor proactively pass evidence to the police. The policy identifies at 1.3 core principles, including proactively reporting matters to law enforcement and the manner of the provision of information and for what purpose it may be shared. Policy minimum control standards requires that the group legal director makes the decision to report a potential crime against the Post Office to law enforcement. Tool 2 of the legal playbook is a flowchart which lays out how data intended to be shared is categorised by risk and how it may be provided to law enforcement. Where the evidence is not Legacy Horizon or HNGX, and where there is no reason to believe the data to be provided is unreliable or inaccurate, corroborative evidence should be sought. Where none can be discovered in the Post Office's control, the evidence is to be considered medium risk. Can you assist us with that paragraph in particular and how it is that corroborative evidence can be sought?
So that part of the policy is basically saying if it's the current version of Horizon, it can be passed, but it would be considered medium risk if there wasn't anything else to corroborate that evidence.
And does that reflect in some way a concern that there may be unreliable data within even the new system?
I didn't write that, and I wasn't party to it, but my reading and my understanding from those that were around at the time is that it's a sensitivity issue, not necessarily a distrust of the data. It's we're seeking to rely on Horizon data that didn't go well before.
1.4 says point 3 of Tool 2 describes how the provision of medium risk data to law enforcement must be managed. It must not be provided unless the Post Office is legally compelled to provide it or the board approves its voluntary disclosure. And it's that point that you are seeking to change.
Correct.
Thank you. And in line with the Chair's question, what is the current status of those discussions? Your evidence has been that that change hasn't been made. Why do you think it hasn't been made, and who do you think is responsible?
So I think that the decision hasn't been made because of the obvious sensitivities connected to saying, actually, we think the version of Horizon that we run at the moment is fit for the business to use. I find that slightly odd, because if there were concerns, why are we using it?
Thank you. So that might be an appropriate moment to take our lunch.
Yes, by all means, yeah.
Could we come back at 2 o'clock, please?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much.